Distracted driving kills hopes, dreams, futures, potential, careers, opportunities. Distracted driving kills people. Please drive smart and pay attention.
Extra enforcement now on Minnesota roads.
10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
You have entered Untold Radio AM. And now broadcasting from a secret location, your hosts, Joel Sturgis and Doug Hajicek. And welcome to this edition of Untold Radio AM. I'm your host, Joel Sturgis. Right along with me, as always, we got Mr. Doug Hajicek. Doug, how you doing, man?
Doing good.
Good? You surviving?
Yeah. The doorbell rang about 10 minutes ago, right?
Yeah.
And there was this giant, and I mean, I'm not exaggerating, it was giant. It was like 5 feet high by maybe 4 feet wide box on my porch.
And the box rang the bell, is what you're saying?
No.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
It was from Amazon.
Oh.
So I bring the box in. I could barely get it in because it's so huge, barely fit through the door. And I'm thinking, what in the heck did I order that's this big? So I tear the first layer off, and there's another box inside. Big, but smaller. And I finally got through that one. And then there was, the final box was like 3 foot by 3 foot by 1 foot. But it was in a box that was 5 foot tall by maybe 4 foot in diameter. And my whole garage is full of cardboard now, Joel.
Oh, is that the story?
No.
That you wanted to... So what was in the box? I mean, we just can't leave it there like, hey, it's full. What was in the box?
A bunch of things for an electric bike.
Ooh. Is it going to be the Squatcher Stalker 3002?
Yes.
Really?
Yep.
Interesting. You know, ever since I named it the Squatcher Stalker 3000, people have been referring to it as the Squatcher Stalker 3000.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's marketing.
Yeah,
marketing genius.
It's not genius.
No. You want to put that up there as one of the greatest product names of the 20th century, 21st century now?
Yes, and speaking of Squatcher and Squatcher Stalker, we've got 3 really cool guys on tonight. So tonight we're going to do a show with 3 guests. Not 1, but 3.
It'll be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that, Doug.
You think we can?
I'm really looking forward to having these 3 gentlemen on. But tonight, for your listening pleasure, I will introduce them. Micah Hanks, Dakota, Waddell, and Jeff Smith is on with us. And they have been in the arena of Bigfoot research for many, many years. And it's going to be a lot of fun to talk with them about what they have discovered out there, whether it be between tracks, sightings, stories, stuff like that. I am really excited to talk with these 3 gentlemen.
Yep, these guys are all historians about, Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
Citizen science. Certainly be a topic tonight.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
But I have a stunning story.
That's what you promised. I've been waiting for you to lay this thing out there.
Don't forget about my stunning story. And you don't even know what it is.
I don't.
Do you want to hear it?
I do want to hear it. We're just going to start calling you Stunning Doug Hajicek.
It better be stunning. Okay. So, 1977, there was a giant UFO over Minneapolis that nobody has ever heard about. It stopped the traffic on 694, the freeway.
Mm-hmm.
Which you know where that is.
I do know where that is.
Stopped it in both directions for like an hour. Because this UFO, everybody claims it was the size of a Walmart. 200 feet in the air, parked over the freeway. Now, you've never heard this, correct, Joel?
No, this is the first time I've heard this story.
It's never been on the news. It's never made the news. No one's ever talked about it. It happened in the 70s when you were pretty much, burned at the stake if you mentioned the word UFO.
Yes.
Yeah, back in those days. But it's just so interesting because there's one guy that's come forward. He is actively looking for anybody who was on that freeway that day. But could you imagine how the traffic would back up on both directions for that length of time? Having a UFO the size of a Walmart. And the other thing that's really amazing of the story, because I had never heard it, is that it was the first triangular craft ever reported. A giant triangle.
Man, that is cool. I mean, because we've heard a lot about triangles after that point. I mean, they were everywhere for a long time.
Right.
But this is the first one. Was right here in Minnesota. Interesting. Did not even know. Haven't even heard the tale before. This is the first time.
In the actual area it happened, I don't know if you can remember, but when you drive from through Roseville and then you're heading west on 694, there's an area where it's kind of an overlook. You can see the city for miles. Mm-hmm. That's exactly where they first spotted it. And it was just, sitting locked into place. And of course, as they got closer and closer, the thing got big, and they could see how huge it was. And they had no choice but to stop too, right underneath this UFO. But as the story goes, it lifted one corner, sailed over to a field that was alongside the freeway eventually, sat there for another 10, 15 minutes, and then lifted another corner and then sailed off. It was gone within 2 seconds.
Damn. That's nuts. I can imagine that in a major urban center like that.
But
all those people.
Flash forward to today. What would have went down had that would have happened in 2021? Think of 300 people filming it.
Yeah.
With their self.
That's exactly right.
At 200 feet away. Something is, once again, I said the size of a Walmart building.
Jeez.
That would have 100% been the disclosure.
Oh, for sure. For sure. There'd no longer be a question of existence.
Yep. Just through citizens. And so that was something that I want to put a call out, since we're local. If anybody was on that freeway in 1977, certainly there's going to be some survivors that are still going to be alive.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago, really.
But if somebody was in their 40s back then, may have left Earth.
True.
But I just really would love to talk to some eyewitnesses that were actually there.
I would too. I would like to get their take on what they saw and what they experienced.
Yeah.
What it was like as they're looking at this craft that size. I mean, a Walmart, think about it, a Walmart building is human. I mean, it's humongous.
Yes. Yep.
And so that would be very interesting to see what they saw and felt and what their interaction was. I'd be also interested to see if anyone had any missing time, stuff like that.
Don't know. But could you how much traffic would have been backed up for an hour with this thing parked over the freeway?
And so this thing was parked over the freeway, back up, Doug, for 1 hour. 200
feet above the freeway.
So there had been law enforcement involved at that point. An hour?
Yeah, I don't know. There was traffic just backed up and jammed. Of course, the people that first saw it stopped. I mean, you got to be stunned to stop in the middle of a freeway.
It would be interesting to see if someone could dig up some type of law enforcement reports on that.
Be cool. Yes. So as far as I know, it has never been reported. This is probably the first time most people have ever heard of such an event.
That is cool.
So
that is really cool.
They let the Jolster down?
No, that's pretty stunning. I had no idea that was going on, or that did happen.
Yeah. Yep.
And that there was that many people to witness a UFO event.
Yep.
And if any of you guys were out in that area in 1977, and you remember seeing this UFO, and how could you forget? I mean, it'd be a life-changing experience. Write in. Get a hold of us. Get a hold of anyone, really.
Or if they heard this story from a relative.
Yeah. Even if you know somebody that saw it. Better yet, maybe one of you guys happened to have a camera in the car and took a picture. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. Yeah, that probably didn't happen.
No, I understand that because, photography would have been 35 millimeter and then Polaroid back in those days. So just in case, you just never know. You just never know. So what's your take on that tale, Doug?
The person that's reported it is extremely credible. Was here from Oregon, believe it or not, on vacation. Was on their way back from friends from a visit. Was a super credible guy. I don't know. Just be nice for us to be able to meet another witness. Anybody.
I'd like to talk to him on air.
Yeah, it'd be good.
Just to talk with him and hear what it was like that day.
All right, let's switch gears and let's get our guests on.
Yeah, we got a lot of great stuff happening. We got Micah Hanks on tonight. He's a longtime podcaster, writer, and former producer for iHeartMedia. Yes, my current company. His work covers a wide range of topics, including anthology, history, art, anthropology.
Break it down, Joel.
History, study of anomalous phenomena in nature, and he is an avid outdoorsman. But also, we're going to be talking with him about history of Bigfoot too. That'll be great. We also have Dakota Smokey Waddell on, holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology and history, and currently completing an associate's degree in geomatics. I cannot read today, Doug. Oh my good Lord. These bifocals are killing me. Jeff Smith is an Air Force veteran with nearly, get this, 3,000 hours in the air as a navigator in a C-130. Could you imagine that? That's amazing. And training on various aircrafts. He holds a bachelor's degree in English literature with a minor in classical studies from the University of Arkansas and a master's degree in military operations, arts and sciences from the Air Force's Air Command and Staff College. Gentlemen, aside from destroying your bios, welcome to the show.
Well, it is our pleasure to be here indeed.
Absolutely.
I do have to apologize. I got new. Yeah, I'm getting old.
Yeah, it sucks getting old, doesn't it?
It is horrible.
We'll take a anthropological apology.
There you go.
Joel can never say anthropology, ever.
I can't. It's like that is my Achilles heel of words.
I've got words too I cannot say.
It's just I don't know why, because after it's done, it's like, well, what the hell did I screw that up for? And I'll say it 10 times, and that whole thing.
Well,
but here we are nonetheless.
I can't say it without tearing up because I love it so much. So
Micah's got a love for it.
Micah, how did you get started in being interested in Bigfoot?
Well, when I was a wee little lad, early in life, my father passed along books to me, and they weren't just books about Sasquatch. Two of them were, and those are the ones that really stand out in my mind in particular. Ivan Sanderson's Abominable Snowman Legend Come to Life, and of course also Peter Burns' The Search for Bigfoot. There was another book I'll mention also, and I still have it. It's right there on that shelf. It was Ray Fowler's UFOs, Interplanetary Visitors, and really that's probably the subject people know me best for. And let me just drop this right now. We could talk about triangle UFOs. We could really have a conversation about that. But as far as the Sasquatch subject, yeah, that's really been something since about age 4 or 5 I have been interested in. But you know how it is, and I think this is very similar for you too, Doug. Maybe it starts as an interest, and then once you have moved from the interest level and reading the books and enjoying the subject and telling the stories over into, now I'm going to go out maybe and research this, maybe even do field research. I'm going to study the history. I'm going to talk to people who have had experiences themselves. And then before you know it, you're producing television documentaries. I haven't done that, but you have. But I've written a lot about the subject over the years, and so there's still similarities, I think, in our approach. You really get, hooked. And when that hook gets set, it's hard to get out. So here we are, decades later, and I've even dragged these two guys along into it with me.
Introducing touch-free payments from PayPal, a safe way for your customers to pay. Simply download the PayPal app and display your own unique QR code for your customers to scan. Whether you're a market seller,
I'll take 2 tomatoes and a cucumber,
poodle pamperer, piano tuner, or plumber. Signing up to accept touch-free payments for your business is easy. Touch-free QR code payments. Shop safe with PayPal.
Whatever you're funny, Peacock's got it exclusively. Bears beats The Office on Peacock. Stream every moment from Dunder Mifflin and explore bonus extras and exclusives. Plus, if you're looking for more classic hits, you can stream every episode of Parks and Recreation, 2.5 Men, and every season of SNL. In the mood for something brand new? Check out Peacock's original comedies, The Amber Ruffin Show, and Saved by the Bell. Whether you're craving a new binge or familiar fave, you can find tons of comedy hits on Peacock. Get started for free at peacocktv.com.
I was just about to ask, how did you guys end up coming together as a... I hesitate to use... I'm going to use a really lame analogy. As a Bigfoot supergroup. How did you guys come together?
Well, about 20 years ago, I met Micah. And, just kind of going into my own background of it, I have this vivid memory of owning this, Reader's Digest book when I was a kid. It's called Strange Stories and Amazing Facts. And, there's a 3 or 4 page blurb about Bigfoot in it. And just, ever since I have. And I don't know, seriously, about 20 years ago, I met Caleb, Micah's brother, and we started playing music together and just hanging out at the house. And 20 years later, here we are. And then Jeff and I had been in school together. We both were working on the geomatics program, which is basically, it's the fancy word for land surveying. And we got to talking in class one day, and I said something about, me and Micah. And Jeff was just like, wait, Micah who?
I said, Micah Hanks? ? Because I had been listening to his Gralien Report podcast for some years already. And it was serendipitous that it happened to come up in this conversation while we're outside doing a level loop exercise for our land surveying class.
And then Micah and I had done, I don't know, how many episodes did we do of the other?
Yeah, for a short time we had launched it was a subscriber podcast that I've been doing for my main gig. CryptoX, we called it. We covered all cryptozoology, and we loved all that stuff. But we'd talked for a long time about formalizing it, making it, a little more focused. And so we said, let's do an all Sasquatch show. And believe it or not, he kept saying, you got to meet this guy, Jeff. And the three of us all hung out for the first time together at a Sasquatch festival in Marion, North Carolina. Great place to meet, huh?
that sounds perfect.
So yeah, it was kismet, if you will.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's interesting how I just couldn't believe, I said Micah, and Jeff was just like, you mean Micah Hanks? I was like, what are the odds, man, that when he would, I think, Jeff, you told me that you would listen to the Gralien Report when you were in Pensacola.
When I was living near Pensacola, Florida. I was in my last duty assignment, getting ready to retire and figuring out what I wanted to do, and I still had to stay in shape. So I was running up and down the beach roads, listening to various podcasts, and of course Micah's was one of them. So it was really interesting how it turned out. It was, like I said, it was serendipity. It was so cool.
And yeah, we would call that maybe even almost a synchronicity in certain circles. One of those meaningful coincidences that up in life. Yeah.
So everything does happen for a reason. Go ahead, Doug. Sorry about that.
I was saying, when you guys get together, I'm not talking about the podcast, and just socially. Do you guys talk about Bigfoot?
Oh, yeah.
You never get tired of it.
No, it's almost all we talk about. I think our families all get tired of us. They're like, guys, please go camping or something.
Yeah.
And go get it out of your system for a little while because, like I said, Doug, and again, I know this is something that you can relate to because, we've all followed your work for so long. Once you get bitten by the bug, It's something that really stays with you. And it's funny because we were talking about UFOs briefly. I write more on that subject and I cover that more on podcasts and things these days. I actually produce 4 different shows right now, including the one these guys and I do together. But I'm going to tell you right now, I've told people that since childhood, I think that really the idea of America's great and enigmatic and very shy relic hominoid, Sasquatch, is and has always been really my favorite topic. And to people who are critics and say, gosh, why would you waste your time on something like Sasquatch? You really think that thing's out there? And I'm like, well, not only have I spoken to so many people who have had what seemed to be very meaningful experiences where they have seen something that they said, I wouldn't have believed it either had I not seen it. But I also say on the subject of anthropology, even if you're in the skeptic camp and you didn't think that this thing existed, this is still a subject that should be interesting to anthropologists for a number of reasons. One, the paleoanthropological side of this and the idea that, we know that there are creatures like Gigantopithecus that did exist. They exist in the fossil record. Yep. Some contend they still exist today. There's a great documentary that was made about that a few years ago. But the other thing, too, is that even if you want to study this only as a sociological or a cultural phenomena, yet again, in the social sciences, which falls, especially in the United States under anthropology as well, that's something that ethnologists, folklorists, a lot of people who are professionals should be interested in. What is it that has made this such a lasting archetype, if you will? So even for the skeptics, I would say that there's something to it. Now, we happen to be interested in that side of it, but we're also proponents of a physical reality based on the preponderance of eyewitness reports that seem to describe something very much like humans, but again, also a lot like Gigantopithecus and other relics, from the fossil record.
It's not going to go away. Scientists can ignore this forever. It's never going to disappear.
No,
but
it's
the devil's advocates. Sorry to butt in here, but I got to be devil's advocate for a minute because I see the other side very clearly as well. Why no sightings? You would think that after all these years of mankind, moving westward expansion, we pretty much covered every square inch of this country. You would think that there would have been 1 or 2 captured somehow, some way. I hear that all the time from people. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that the law of averages would have yielded a Bigfoot by now?
Jeff's gonna.
No, it's possible. This is what I shared on our show when we were talking about this subject. Is if you look at a map or a picture of the United States at night, they've got those satellite photos at nighttime. You do see a lot of bright spots, but most of it is dark. Mm-hmm. There's so much land out there that we've never set foot on that would be good habitat for these creatures. That seems reasonable to me. Why we wouldn't have brought one in just yet.
No, absolutely. We talked to Mark Marcel. He's a land surveyor out in Washington and Oregon, and there's places I'm sure that, I know there's places surveying here in and Jeff knows too, in the mountains of western North Carolina. There's places that people hadn't been in decades. Like you get up some of these ridge tops and stuff, decades. And you're right, Jeff. It's really staggering to see those nighttime light photos of how much blackness there is in the Midwest, the plains, the Rockies and stuff. And if you've never been out there, it's barren compared to the East Coast. I live kind of, about an hour from Charlotte, and there's still a lot of farmland and stuff out here, there's a lot of houses, but there's still so much farmland too that I'll realize that once I get to a job site sometimes and I get down in the woods and I have no idea how far it is back to the truck. And it's just really right over a ridge, but you feel so remote. So I don't know about the law of averages sometimes, especially just knowing how empty, the middle part of the state is, or the country is, of human population.
Yeah, but another dimension to add to that also, and I really think that, like you guys have, phrased it, turn out the lights, look where human habitation actually is. We take for granted how much remote wildlife or wild, country there is out there, uninhabited country in continental North America. But if you also look at satellite imagery in daylight, go up there to the Pacific Northwest, which has long been kind of held to be a hotbed of, really the traditional, stomping ground of Sasquatch. But look up the Pacific coast there. starting with the Cascades and work your way up through Canada, the West Coast, all the way up there to the corner of Alaska. Look at how rugged and remote those mountains are. The very area where these creatures, according to indigenous American populations, have been said to exist for really since time immemorial. Nobody's going up there either. I mean, mountain climbers do, hikers do, campers do, and occasionally these people come back and tell stories too. But we often presume, and I think that's really the best thing, to call it a presumption, that humans, well, we're all over the place and people would see these things and certainly capture one by now. Maybe that's not necessarily the case. And in fact, I would further argue that Sasquatch, if it exists, is maybe not the only creature that is wary enough that it can evade humans extremely well. We could go down the list and talk about several others that are believed to be extinct or possibly critically endangered that people still do say that they see, which are not extraordinary creatures like Sasquatch, but nonetheless, very few sightings.
Yeah. I mean, okay, if you had mentioned the coast. If you go up the coast, up into British Columbia, all the way to Alaska, that coast is wild. I mean, that's the first place people settle, is on the coast. And even that's empty. I remember going to places in Washington and walking 10 miles, never seeing one house on the coast. And I was thinking, oh my God, the amount of food that was available on the beach, right? And the amount of wildlife we saw was incredible. And this is today.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. People don't realize. Oh, and the other thing I was just going to mention, and you guys can take it, but Tom Steenberg gave a really amazing soundbite in one of my MonsterQuest episodes. He said, like, the wilds of Canada are more wild today than they were back hundreds of years ago because the indigenous people don't live there anymore.
Yeah.
And I went, oh, yeah. It is empty up there. There's nobody up there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could make the argument that, in fact, I mean, now that there are more protected wilderness areas and that there are fewer, unfortunately, indigenous residents, that there are certain areas that maybe are actually not only more thick and more wooded, but that are also going to be less likely to be, visited by people. Because, again, the other thing you got to think about, too, as recently as within the last few decades, but certainly a century or more ago, people had to go into the forest because that was where they found all that food you're talking about, Doug. Today, modernity has really made us lazy. We go a good couple of miles, but not on foot. We jump into a car. We go to the supermarket. We buy, all the stuff that we need, either in cans or we buy it in the frozen food section or we buy it there in the produce section or whatever. We don't have to go grow vegetables or pick vegetables anymore or forage. Go and buy everything we need and bring it back to the house. These days, people go into the wild for recreation, and that's the only reason they do it. And only, unfortunately, small portion of the population goes and does that. So, yeah, I could absolutely buy the argument, and it's a good one, that maybe there are areas that are even less, less frequently visited and therefore more likely to harbor creatures like Sasquatch if they exist.
And even hunting is on the decline. Don't you agree, Joel? And Jeff?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
It's on the decline. So when you guys mention, it's people mainly going into the forest for recreation, those are also the people that are coming back with all the sightings.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still a proponent that I think 1% or even less than 1% are ever reported.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. Well, the one I think was a Sasquatch sighting that I went through. What was I doing? I was hunting. Yeah. So, I was out in the woods hunting. So, yeah, a lot of hunters do encounter them.
You did not make an official report.
No, because, I didn't want to be viewed as nuts.
No, well,
that was my first thought.
It's not in a database. If it's not in a database, you didn't report it.
Yeah, because I wasn't a believer at that point in Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I was a open-minded skeptic.
Yeah,
is what I was.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're right. Unless you report it, it can't get cataloged. If it can't get cataloged, it can't become a lead to evidence.
Yeah. And I've had 2 really good sightings myself, but once again, they're not in any database. Shame on me.
Sometimes the only thing worse than bad data is no data.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I don't, Joel, I totally get you, man. I think that's the biggest holdup for a lot of people is just like, it's like you want to report it. Like if I saw it, I'd want to report it. Sure. Of course, then again, I'm also a believer, and everybody I know that is friends with me knows that I'm a believer. So I don't really care if they think I'm crazy anyhow. But you're just your average, average Joe on the street or in the woods. Like I could totally get it. Like, the blowback could be a lot different for that person,
Well, when I told my friends that were my rest of my hunting party that came to get me the following day where I was at, I mentioned it to them, and they looked like I had a third arm growing on my forehead, like I was completely nuts.
You didn't, did you?
No, I didn't.
Okay, just
not
making sure.
that point. That wasn't until I had to cover Chernobyl. That's
okay.
now grew out. But before that, I did not. Now I have that third hand, and it comes in handy quite often, let me tell you.
See what you did.
But at that point, when I had told them what I had experienced, of course, they looked at me like I was, ready for the loony bin. Like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. No,
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy is suspected of having killed as many as 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series that investigates the crimes that shocked the nation.
The thing everybody thought they knew wasn't the whole story.
John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now. Devil in Disguise. Only on Peacock. Whatever you're funny, Peacock's got it exclusively. Stream classic sitcoms like The Office, Parks and Recreation, and 2.5 Men. Plus, catch Peacock original comedies like AP Bio and Saved by the Bell. For all your exclusive comedy faves, go to peacocktv.com and get started.
That kind of thing. So, and the ridicule of others. Like, that was how I felt. Like, okay, I better shut up now because obviously they're not believing me.
Well, the other thing is, too, there's great interest in anthropologists, primatologists in this country. Trust me, a lot of them are interested, but they have not been able to figure out a way to come forward and keep their job.
Yeah.
And so they're just quietly observing, quietly, just collecting their own little data. And I'm sure they're all amazed. Tomorrow night, I have a meeting with some people who are, primatologists, but their identity is secret. Because that's the way it needs to be.
Yeah, I'll talk to you, but under these circumstances.
Absolutely. And, they're talking because they're interested in the topic, but they're not willing to share their interest. They're just going to quietly wait and see and collect their own data and listen and just shut up and listen, basically, which is sad. It's sad, but it's better than nothing. All these people are going to come forward and go, oh, yeah. Oh, we knew all along these things.
They're going to swoop in and take all the glory.
Gentlemen, serious question, though, Doug. Before you move on, Doug, I got to ask all four of you here. Doug, you included here. Do you believe that our Department of the Interior and the government do you believe that they know that these exist? Do you think the government truly knows that these exist, but they're choosing not to release that data?
Well, it's funny you'd ask that question because, one of our long-term projects that we have been carrying out is we have been reaching out to government officials at various agencies, but especially, with Fish and Wildlife on the state level, state by state, and then also, of course, Department of the Interior on the federal level. And we have filed a number of requests. Jeff, in his case, has just reached directly out to park officials, emailed them and said, what are your protocols and procedures for reporting these things? Or if someone reports them, what do you guys do? In my case, it's been Public Records Act requests and Freedom of Information Act requests that have been filed over the course of the last couple of years. Based on the information released to me, there's very little information collected by the National Park Service and other agencies. There have been a few documents that have come forward. On the state level, only a couple of states have really provided anything, and it wasn't anything. There has been no smoking gun. But our big takeaway, and Jeff, I think you could speak to this point too, is that It seems that federal and state agencies certainly hear about these things from time to time. Seldom do they take direct interest in it because they lead with a presumption, and I can't really blame them for doing this, but they would tend to think, well, this is a myth and people are just making stuff up. The Bigfooters, they're out there just having fun. And when someone like us reaches out to them, especially in an official capacity and formally files a FOIA request, some of the responses, in fact, I've actually on one occasion gotten a phone call from a park employee who called back and said, I listened to your podcast and was amazed to see an official request come from you guys. No one's ever filed one before. So the other thing, too, is that they don't generally keep records. They aren't used to getting requests from the public about that kind of thing. And they say that, even if we hear these kind of things, we don't keep any documentation about it. So in other words, I don't think it's that they don't hear about it, but I don't think that they take enough interest to kind of formalize any kind of reporting on it. So as to whether or not certain park employees believe or not, I think it's just like what we're talking about. Some of them probably do, and we know of some instances where some have had personal experiences and sightings. But again, they never kept any kind of formal records of that. We had to track those individuals down and interview them ourselves.
And I actually remember when we first started kind of talking, or when Micah started talking about, filing some of these FOIA acts and stuff, just thinking outside of the box, about what government agencies other than the, kind of the main ones we'd already thought of, like, could you get in touch with, like Department of Interior, Department of Ag, state parks, national parks, but anything, just any other governmental agency that was kind of outside of the purview of wildlife. I mean, we're just really pulling at straws here, thinking like, all right, well, and I think that's the other thing is, I think we believe that, like Micah said too, like maybe people just have never thought about actually taking the time to, ask the feds, like out of fear or whatever, or, I think that's what it is. Maybe even out of fear, or just not even, thinking about asking someone or an agency at that stature.
It's a little odd. I'll just add too, Dakota, that, if you look at the world of UFOs, UFO researchers frequently rely on Freedom of Information Act requests to try and obtain information from government. Yet again, the government does seem to keep information on that subject, but I fear that there's maybe less being kept than the general public would hope for. But with regard to Sasquatch, and again, Jeff, you should talk about your own experience, reaching out to park officials, because often they're like, we don't keep files about mythical creatures. And even people who say that we're interested in this subject have contacted me and said, but we don't keep documentation about it.
Yeah, when I reached out just locally here in the state parks, national parks in this area, the chief biologists in each of the different regions that we have here for our wildlife folks. And yeah, almost to a person, it was, we don't keep track of that stuff because it's not hard science. And it was also a matter of, we don't have money to do that either. The only crack I saw on the facade came from from a national forest that's close to where Dakota lives. He did say that someone higher up in his chain of command mentioned that they may have to start keeping a database just because they were getting so many reports, but they don't have funding to start up a new program to do that. I mean, they're going to tell you they're already understaffed and overworked. And so having to put that on their plate as well is just going to be, too much for them to handle. So they don't do it.
Yeah. Now, there have been some documents obtained related to Sasquatch from federal agencies, which, of course, we could talk about if you guys are interested.
Sure, absolutely. That would be fascinating to hear about the documents they're keeping. And another thing, you guys brought up a great point, is they're already overworked and underpaid as it is. And so adding yet another animal or creature to put on the potential endangered species list would be more expenditure of funds and manpower at the end of the day as well.
Well, and I know for sure too, just that where this area is in the state is particularly not, how do I put this, economically as happy as some other places are. So, they may even have less funding to do so. So, and, it's a real shame. It's so sad. I only live like Well, see, I'm disclosing too much information of where it is. I don't live far from it, and I still haven't gone over there to check it out, and the weather's getting warmer, though, so I'm pretty stoked to try to get to that area soon.
What area is that?
He's trying to keep it a
Wonderland
secret,
Forest,
Micah.
you say?
Actually, no, it's the URA National Forest, which is about an hour and a half from here, just on the other side of Charlotte. So I'm about an hour and a half, and I'm really excited to get down there. And if you look at BFRO's database and you bring up North Carolina and bring up that particular county that's in it, it's like heads and shoulders above the rest of the state when it comes to sightings.
That's a funny place because it's one of the smaller, parks in the state, but it's where all the Bigfooters in North Carolina tend to go because, and there's been some interesting footage that's been obtained there over the years. Again, that wasn't by us. That's just something that happened a number of years ago, but it's kind of interesting. Briefly doubling back around to some of the government files and what have you, a couple of instances of federal government agencies that have kept documentation on this subject. And we did do a podcast episode about that, which appropriately enough was called Sasquatch in Government. One of our most popular episodes, in fact. People are obviously interested in seeing what there is, but there was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife document that was essentially just a sighting report. And it was, again, one of these roadside encounters. A family had been driving along. The driver and the principal witness, I think, had been at a festival prior to that, and there were other passengers in the vehicle. But as they're driving along, they see a large, erect, presumably hirsute figure standing by the side of the road, but it was a little darker. But they said, by all intents and purposes, it looked like Bigfoot. So there was that. Now, more interesting had been the fact, and this was widely reported, just a few months back, that the FBI had a file on Bigfoot. The inside story on that, a friend of mine, John Greenwald Jr. of the Black Vault website, had been the very one who had actually filed that FOIA request. And he had obtained it and had posted the files there at his website prior to them being released more generally at the Vault, which is the not to be confused with the Black Vault, but the FBI's FOIA reading room they call the Vault on their website. You can go, and often when there are files that have been disclosed to the public, regarding anything, historical files, investigative files, anything, they'll post them there. And so after those files were made available to John Greenwald, they were posted at the FBI website. And, journalists will go and just every, few weeks comb and just kind of see what the new files are that are released. And if anything really, sensational and juicy pops up, they're going to write about it. And so they spotted the Bigfoot file pretty quickly. Now, the other side of that, too, is the fact that it specifically references in the files what they had to do with were hair samples that were analyzed at the request of one Peter Byrne. That's right. Peter Byrne had acquired some hair samples, and this was related to an incident that he describes in his book. Doug, this is one of those first books that, I actually acquired when I was a kid. It was The Search for Bigfoot. And in that book, he describes an encounter. And so here, years later, I called him up a couple of years ago and interviewed him. And we talked about that because the FBI files had been released at that point. And he said, I would never have thought after all these years they'd kept that file. Now I wonder if they've still got that sample. And if so, if there might be modern analysis, techniques that could be applied towards studying it. So that's maybe one of the more significant instances where a, agency of the federal government actually did have a file on Bigfoot. But I've also found some, Sasquatch-related files in the CIA database that they've released on their website. Most of that, on the other hand, unlike the FBI, where there actually was a sample and an analysis conducted, CIA, they'll collect newspaper clippings about all kinds of stuff. And they may have something about, like, assassination of, Robert Kennedy or something like that. But over here on this side of the page, it'll say abominable snowman expedition this weekend, and it's like a little tiny snippet or something, but when they digitize that, if you do a search on their website, that'll come up. And so most of the files that the CIA has at its website, they're not really having to do with Sasquatch, but if you go and look for that, you'll certainly find some. So, again, I wish that there were more information. I keep holding out hope that maybe some government agency is looking into this, and we just haven't sent FOIAs to that division yet, but we'll keep looking, gents.
Yeah, I had heard of a case that the FBI was involved in where a bunch of dogs had been literally ripped in two. And I think it was somewhere in Louisiana, and they were involved because it was just such a strange crime. And that's, certainly one area where they're going to get involved. They weren't investigating Bigfoot, but they were trying to figure out how in the world were these dogs torn in two. I mean, these were full-grown German Shepherd type, dogs.
And that was Louisiana, you said.
Louisiana, yep.
So Dakota, a few years ago, we got an email, and this is an interesting one. This is not something that presumably would have anything, there wouldn't be documentation about this, but there was a military encounter in Louisiana that we got an email about, and it's one of the more interesting stories I recall ever hearing. Briefly, the gentleman wrote to me and had said that during a military training exercise, he was at Fort Polk at the time, and he said that they were doing a nighttime training operation where he and 3 other members of his company became disoriented and lost there in the, in a kind of swampy lowland area there in Louisiana. And so he said, we knew that if we headed south, if memory serves, it would take them to this particular highway and that they were just going to try and thumb a ride back to the entrance to the base. He said, as we were making our way toward that highway, my 3 members and I became aware of something else that was pacing us a short distance behind us. Now, they did have some lighting, and they said that the eyes on this creature appeared to glow orange or red, and it was obviously tall and standing upright. And they said that this creature followed them all the way to the road. Now, when they got down there to the highway, they saw headlights from an oncoming vehicle, and they were able to flag a guy with a pickup truck down and get him to give them a ride, back to the base. But he was coming from the direction where they were walking up the road, and he was able to see behind them several yards. And he said, was there somebody else with you when he picked him up? And they said, well, there was something. And he says, it looked like there was somebody maybe wearing some sort of baggy clothing or covered in hair or a hairy coat or something. But he said something was down the road behind you guys, and it stepped over into the woods. And so he said that, and I've, again, something else I love to do with the history side of this is dig through old newspaper archives. I haven't found that account, but the gentleman who wrote the story.
The sweet aromas of the apple fritter, cinnamon roll, and blueberry muffin are hard to resist. So making it home without reaching into the McDonald's bag is no easy task. Make it easier by ordering ahead on the McDonald's app. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Mobile order and pay participating McDonald's.
Or wrote to us about it. He said that there was an article in the newspaper written at that time documenting it. So there's a military encounter where these guys said that whatever that thing was in Louisiana followed them that night, and its eyes glowed, which is an interesting thing too, because again, that seems to bespeak to me, we might interpret that as tapetum lucidum, which is something that primates aren't supposed to have, with the exception of lemurs in Madagascar. I've talked to Meldrum about that. We've talked to a lot of experts, Peter Byrne too. Most say that it's unlikely that this is true tapetum, the actual reflective membrane within the eye, but that's a unique characteristic that you see a lot more frequently, I think, than is properly given consideration toward and discussed in the dialogue about these creatures. It's a very unique characteristic they possess.
Well, the big argument is whether it's eye reflection or is it an eye glow, actual bioluminescence. Because, boy, if I've talked to 100 people that say, nope, there was no other light, there's no way it could have been a reflection. The eyes were glowing. They were actually producing their own light. And years ago, I read a scientific paper where they had found just a few cells in every human that they had done autopsies on and done this molecular study on the back of the eye, that they had found that humans were the only animal that they could find with the number of rhodopsin cells that actually produced the light in the back of humans' eyes. That could be one of these holdover genetic things. And I found that really interesting, that humans, which were upright hominids, had eyes that could actually glow.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say the question that I have for that, when I learned in my high school biology class that form follows function, what would be the function of having, self-glowing eyes? What kind of benefit would that be to you to help you, see at night or what? I don't know.
I can think of a lot of things. One, it would be a great way to communicate.
That's true.
Stay in touch. You could blink. You could use blink. The other thing that it would do, it would create photos. So you could take a photo, you could literally use your eyes as a camera. Okay, so one of the ways you can test it is to stare at a bright object, close your eyes, and you can still see it. Well, if your eyes could glow, you could use that system day and night, and retain photos, possibly even for days.
Never thought. This is the first time I'm hearing about this stuff.
Yeah, this is the first for me as well. It's very interesting.
Well, that's what I do.
He's a thinker. But it is interesting. I mean, and anyone who would think that that's a unlikely or even improbable proposition, bioluminescence occurs in nature. I mean, we do see it.
Absolutely.
And if we're talking about a creature that has uniquely adapted to living at night, I mean, there are other instances where primates extant today have done the same thing. Again, Meldrum actually talked about in Legend Meets Science, chimpanzees that have adapted. Now, they don't actually have tapetum. They also don't have any kind of specialized capabilities for night vision, but they're able to live and function perfectly fine in the dark. And again, with Meldrum's essential argument, this and, Peter Byrne and he and several others, in fact, have made this. But I mean, they have said that whatever the case may be, it's not impossible that these creatures could exist and thrive in darkness. But I keep coming back to the idea based on the repeated description of the glowing eyes. And again, we should make that distinction between, eyes that reflect and eyes that glow. I think the description given to us by the gentleman in the case that we mentioned there in Louisiana, he had said the eyes glowed red. That was his wording. I always assume that means like eye shine that nocturnal animals display, but more often than not, you see that terminology used. And if you actually look in the literature, there are instances where eyewitness descriptions explicitly say, like you mentioned, Doug, the eyes appeared to actually glow as though they were emitting a light, a faint light, but it was a light nonetheless. So, I mean, could we be talking about some kind of a unique adaptation? I simply don't know, but I mean, I think that description comes up too often to be ignored.
Yeah, it does. And I don't know what to think of it. I have not seen it, myself. But, I mean, when you hear somebody go, man, it had you could see the rays of light coming out of its eyes in total darkness of green or whatever color. Because I've heard glow reported as orange, as green, as red. Mm-hmm. And those reports, people will argue. They're like, no, it was not reflection. It was glowing. But once again, if you can go back to those protein cells that we have in our bodies right now, Jeff, you have protein cells that make light in your eyes. That's cool to me. It's not a lot. It's not enough. But they can actually right now detect those in total darkness, your eyes glowing. And I find that really cool.
Yeah, it's wild.
Once again, it makes a bit of sense. Instead of debunking it, it kind of, boosts it a little bit. Doesn't boost it a lot, but it boosts it a bit.
I always assumed when someone would come to me and talk about their encounter and they'd say, the eyes were glowing. I thought they were talking about eye shine. But that puts a completely different spin on it now.
These guys, like I'm sure you guys have interviewed a lot of witnesses, a lot of them, if you actually start drilling down, they'll argue with you, which I do when I do talk to a witness. They'll go, okay, no. There were no flashlights. There were no headlights. Its eyes were glowing. The moon wasn't out. There was a clear glow. It wasn't, really bright, but it was glowing. So who knows?
Yeah. These are fascinating, though. Don't you love this stuff?
Oh, yeah. Because what I love about it more than anything, the more you research, the more the dots connect versus disconnect. If we were dealing with something that didn't exist, the dots would keep disconnecting. You would keep hitting dead ends. I never hit dead ends. I keep hitting the opposite, where it's like, oh, holy crap. That matches, possible evolution or possible something we lost. And it goes on and on and on with every aspect of the Bigfoot.
Yeah. And, when you were on our program, Doug, something we talked about, of course, was what has been termed the Sasquatch alba vernix.
Yep.
This whatever this substance is that their skin seems to secrete, hand imprints, and even in some instances face imprints that have been left on glass, the appearance of etching on glass. That's another one that seems to suggest something that is not entirely unlike what you have, what you may see in certain other extant primates, but if it's similar at all, it is definitely a unique version of it, a unique, yet again, adaptation for a primate. Now, in my opinion, again, there are a lot of people who like to speculate about, the spectral nature of Sasquatches, their ability to, emerge from portals and things like this. And I've also seen in that same line of thought, well, why should we presume these things are primates? Look, we obviously have a lot of data, but we have so little data that is able to bring, a solid conclusion about what these creatures are that I think it is incumbent upon us. And this is just my opinion, but maybe this is the anthropologist in me thinking, and I'm not a professional anthropologist. I hang out with a lot of them and I play one on the radio. Dakota here's actually got his anthropology degree. So if anybody is, he is. But, the anthropologist mindset, we might say, tends to cause me to want to say, based on all the characteristics that are most prevalent in eyewitness reports, in sightings collected really for centuries, what based on the way these creatures are described, do these most resemble? And therefore, what are they most likely to be? And even with the unique adaptations, everything to me suggests a primate, albeit a very unique kind of primate. So, again, that's the model that I think it's best to work in terms of what Sasquatch might be. And in my opinion, I'm open-minded. I've got a lot of friends, who are like, these things are just too weird. There's no way that we can account for these things as being, anything flesh and blood. Therefore, we must say, paranormal, paraphysical, whatever. But to me, I think before you go to that extreme, even if that were to end up being what these things are, let's try to work with the things that are the most likely and which nature can account for. So, that's where I put it. I say unique, but nonetheless a primate.
Yeah, it's
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just a brief little thing. That's what aggravates me so much sometimes about the alien or spectral Bigfoot kind of stuff. And no hate. If you've got the evidence and you can prove it to me otherwise, fine. But don't try to answer an unknown with an unknown. Like you've got enough anecdotal and some you could say empirical data, or at least enough stuff to work with that makes enough biological sense. Like use what you got. See if it's like Doug, you were talking about, find all these dots and see if you can connect them. And you'll probably be surprised at how many of those dots you do start connecting.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to give you guys an example of a new one that connected yesterday. Okay. Just yesterday. So I'm talking to a world famous primatologist. We're in deep conversation for 2 hours yesterday. And I was telling him about the alba vernix, this waxy stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to pose a question to all three of you. Anybody who is a big baseball fan amongst this group of people?
I'm eagerly awaiting April 3rd.
Okay.
You're a Twins fan, right? You like
the
Twins.
Yeah.
If a pitcher wants to cheat, what does he do? He wants to get a better grip on the ball. What does he do?
Well, he can, if he doesn't want a better grip on the ball, he can do a little of this, get a little grease, But to get a better grip, you got the rosin bag.
Yeah, but yes, exactly.
Pine tar.
Mm-hmm.
So, but also, did you know that oil actually gives you better grip on your hands? Oil and waxes, or anything that's actually a lubricant, gives you a better grip. That's why so many baseball players have been caught cheating with Vaseline, a little lithium grease, a little silicone grease, and it helps them grip the ball with less. It gives them more grip with less friction.
Okay.
That's less pressure. And so when I heard that from him, and he talked about the amount of oil that gorillas have on them, and it's because they need to grip stuff. And once again, it just dropped in place the Alba Vernix, the fact that they would have more oil on their hands, because certainly a Bigfoot would need to grip a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Or, Doug, it could also be a multifunction, a multi-purpose oil. If you think in terms, I often go back to Sanderson's book, which is funny because I mention Abominable Snowman Legend Come to Life. Dakota's had a copy of that for years. I've had one since childhood. Jeff's got a copy. There are a lot of researchers today who aren't even, familiar with that book, people who follow Bigfoot. And I'm like, but have you read Abominable Snowman? And they're like, well, I haven't because I don't really follow the Himalayan Yeti. I just kind of stick with North America. I'm like, guys, that book is not only about the Abominable Snowman. He named it that because, of course, that was the popular term at the time. And this really, because it was prior to, Bigfoot certainly had appeared in American newspapers, but it hadn't really gained cultural foothold, so to speak. But anyway, back to the point about that book. The accounts that Sanderson provides, many of which he actually had sourced from Bernard Heuvelmans, who had written about cryptozoology even before Ivan Sanderson, even though he credited Sanderson with the term. That book features accounts of purported relict hominoids from all over the world. And in many instances, they are described as looking greasy, very dirty. They have a waxy appearance on the skin. So even in some of that fundamental... Yeah, some of that fundamental literature, from around the world seems to describe that. But again, the idea of a multi-purpose that might serve, grip would be one thing. Yep. But what did Sanderson say? Sanderson said, look, I'll tell you right now, and again, being a naturalist who by age 18, I think, was already traveling through the Congo, Sanderson had said, look, there is no better bug repellent than the natural accumulation of body oils on your skin. He says, when you're out there in the woods and you have sweated and you are, filthy and that oil is all over your face, he says that really offers multiple layers of protection. So we could consider bug repellent. We could consider possibly also just general skin protection, from exposure to different things in the environment. It might even aid against, or function as a form of sunblock in a way.
Water repellency on the hair. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So any number of those things could account for why this is such a unique substance that these creatures might produce.
Yeah. It's also antibacterial.
Introducing Peacock, the new free streaming service from NBC Universal. It's hit movies, current shows, live sports, trending bits, and timeless hits. And that's why you can't not watch. Peacock. Watch for free, upgrade for more. Stream now at peacocktv.com. Law & Order SVU streaming now.
Start with everyone who thinks spring is a time when birdies sing, flowers bloom, and noses itch. For you, there's allergy relief from Walgreens. Order online and pick up in as little as 30 minutes. Plus, here's a money-saving offer that's nothing to sneeze at.
Get $5 off at Walgreens.com when you spend $30 on allergy essentials like Zyrtec and Flonase. Just enter code RELIEF at checkout on your pickup order today. Valid on Walgreens.com only through June 26. Exclusions and restrictions apply to offer and 30-minute pickup. Visit Walgreens.com for further offer details.
Bacterial.
Yeah.
It has acids, very acidic. So you get into once again, I love it when things make sense. And I cannot wait to get the actual molecular structure of collected Bigfoot oils compared to gorilla, compared to chimps, and then compared to humans to see what's missing, because we don't have gorillas and chimps in North America. And so if we can collect 100 samples of gorilla sebum, if it does match gorilla, for instance, that's going to open some eyes.
Yeah, maybe some minds too.
Yeah, some minds, I guess.
Let's hope.
Yeah. So, Jeff, I got just a kind of a weird question. Do you ever use some of your military connections to ask some of the military friends, to get them to ask friends as to whether they're having sightings on bases?
By the time that I really got into the subject, because I wasn't into it as a child like Micah and Dakota were, it was almost too late to ask those. And it's a shame because my last duty assignment, being stationed down in Pensacola, there are a lot of other guys that I work with who are AC-130 operators, MC-130 operators. If you know about those aircraft, they have some very high-tech electro-optical equipment on those airplanes for good reason, because they need to be able to pick out the bad guys and take them out to protect our boys out there. But one of the places that they train, well, they're stationed down in Hurlburt Field, which is near Destin and Pensacola, that same area. There is a huge chunk of the Florida Panhandle that is just a training range for those guys. So I would be out, at the soccer fields. My boys would be practicing, and you'd see those guys just doing their orbits, shooting off their rounds. You'd hear them shooting. I always, after I left there, I wanted to ask those guys, have you ever seen anything in those areas? Because there are reports that come out of the Panhandle of Florida. If ever on those training missions you were looking, through your electro-optical systems, your infrared, your FLIR, did you ever see anything out there on the range that you couldn't explain? So I still have some friends who are in that area. I need to reach out to and see if they can give me the skinny on what's going on.
Cool. Go ahead, Joel. You got to have so I can see a burning question.
Oh, I got tons
I see
of them.
it.
I just wanted to let you guys talk. Another kind of question going out to all of you guys involved isn't so much about Sasquatch, but it's the culture of. I mean, it's really become its own industry. What do you guys think about that? I mean, you have all these people out there. I guess maybe a better question, let me back up, is do you believe that with the culture that's out there now and so many people in the woods, is it only a matter of time before we have better answers? And the second part of that question, will it be technology that provides the better answers to those questions along with more people in the woods?
Man, there's a lot to unpack in there. One thing, and we talked to Doug about it. One thing that we're huge proponents of is the idea of citizen science and citizen-driven data. And and I believe, and I think the guys do too, that goes even further beyond the realm of just Sasquatch. But it's the ideas of being able to get involved with some sort of scientific or nature endeavor, just anything that you can do that you can learn how to start properly collecting and processing and handing off data to people who can process that. For instance, a simple one that I'm a member of, I've got a National Weather Service rain gauge, like the ones that they want you to use. And every morning at 6:00 when I go start my truck, I go out and check the rain gauge and I log it. It's a simple way to learn how to collect data very easily. So I think that's what we're a huge proponent of is being able to take that and all the people that are involved and have become interested because of the industry and the culture of Sasquatch, and maybe start trying to get into that and to apply that to the field. I mean, it's like we make the argument so many times about how like the academics are so afraid to come out. And I get why they are. I mean, if you're trying to get grant money for anything, you don't go to the head of your department and say, we're trying to find Sasquatch. Yeah, your grant money just went down the tube, possibly. But if we can get enough citizen-driven science that the academics themselves too can look at it and go, hey, we're getting all this stuff coming in. These people have been trained via, the courses on the internet or going to a course, post COVID. Mm-hmm. I think you guys see where I'm going with this.
I do. I know exactly because I'm big into Bigfoot, but I also equally spend time in haunted locations. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems with the paranormal in that arena is the lack of standards and practices of the groups that are out there, because no one's doing it the same. It's all different. It's all shotgunned all over the place. The data is coming to you from so many different ways, and it doesn't seem like anyone or any group does it. There's no data practices, like you said, logging data. No one seems to do it the same. So how can we have consistent data when the person taking the data is not consistent themselves in the way it's taken?
Yeah, it really helps if you can systematize things. And, to Dakota's point, the effort of trying to get more people who are interested in this subject, who have the time and the desire to be out there in the field, conducting research, the effort to get them up to speed on, scientific protocols for data collection, preservation of the chain of custody, and preservation of samples and actual material that might be recovered, logging and note keeping, a field notebook or even a laboratory notebook, if you're conducting analysis. But of course, we would always recommend collect, but then have qualified experts analyze anything that you find. But nonetheless, for it to be of quality once it reaches the analysts, it has to be preserved properly. So, yeah, the citizen science effort, and I'll toss it back to you here in a moment, Dakota, but really what we advocate is people becoming aware of how everybody can do science in the field. And if they can collect good data, that will be of great use to professional scientists who maybe don't have the funding, who don't have the time, maybe don't even have the interest, but who, if they were given good data, would do something with it.
Well, and this might be jumping the gun a little bit because I want to hear what Jeff has to say too. When it comes to the use of technology, I think technology will definitely have a huge part in it. In my industry, I see how technology and the improvements in technology make my job a little bit easier every day. However, the company I work for now, I still have a traverse field logbook. And when we do our traverses, I write down all my angles, all my distances, everything, because we could get stuck in, freak rainstorm comes out of nowhere, thunderstorm comes out of nowhere, and my instrument loses everything. But I have still got that data, and I can still finish the job. So I think that's another thing that goes hand in hand, and like Micah said, I guess systematizing is just a formatted way to collect that data. I mean, any surveyor that still does field notes probably does them fairly similarly, so we can all communicate about the same data in the same way. So technology will help, but I think good note taking from just good pen and paper note taking is key.
And I would say, speaking to the technology aspect of it, there are a lot of new and very useful tools that are coming out that the prices are going down enough where the common person can get a hold of them and use them in their research. However, I would say if you're going to get these fancy new toys, it behooves you to be intimately familiar with how they work. How often have we heard of someone out there, supposedly in the middle of an experience with what could be Sasquatch, but they don't get any evidence of it because they were fumbling around with the equipment, hit the wrong button. They thought they were hitting record. They were turning the power off. So, I mean, it was something that was ingrained in me in my military aviation career. You've got to know how to operate that equipment. So even, for instance, if we have a fire on board the aircraft, you have to be able to know where the different knobs and switches are. You can't see them, but by the feel and where they are that you can get the right things on and off at the right time, so that it doesn't become a worse emergency than what it could be.
Jeff, that reminds me about years ago, my brother and I, we were granted clearance and we were able to board a nuclear submarine, and we were given a wonderful tour by the XO on the base. And they actually had coffee in the mess hall there on board a nuclear submarine. How many people get to say that they did that if you aren't a member of the U.S. Navy? But when we were in the control room, I was immediately struck by the fact that there was, Braille, and that there were symbols and all kinds of actual,
knobs will have different shapes, so you'll know that, I'm touching this particular knob or whatnot.
So that if you were having to operate in complete darkness, you'd still know what you had your hand on. And that, again, it bespeaks everything you're talking about. Maybe Sasquatch can do that too. Maybe, who knows, maybe that oil helps him feel. It enhances his tactile ability so that he can work in the dark.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about this, unless you guys have any other questions about it, is all the technology in the world is great, but if you don't have the right person who's trained how to use it there to use it, it's not going to mean anything.
Yeah.
So it still comes down to the people in the field who are trained and know what they're doing.
I had posted on Facebook basically new technology that's dummy proof.
That's what I need.
As long as you give it power, it comes on, it's recording from 2 cameras, and it's recording audio. Just give it power. There's no switches to turn on. There's nothing. But you got to have it plugged into a power bank. Yeah. Runs on 5 volts. But those are the kind of things that, I like to post to kind of give people tips, and it's just amazing the response, that I get, because I mean that's it was a motorcycle dash cam. It's waterproof, runs on 5.4 volts, so you don't need a lot of power. You can run it off a little, iPhone power bank. You plug in the USB into it, and it's running, automatically recording. So I love putting out things that are kind of dummy proof, so people don't, they can even take it to that level where just you can keep it on your car dash, keep it plugged into your car lighter, pull it off, attach it to your clothing, go for a hike, put one camera aim behind you, one in the front, and it's going to be recording audio and video. So,
yeah.
That's brilliant.
I love that idea. Since you came on and talked with us about it, we've continued to talk about that. And again, in my opinion, and Joel, this is back to your original question. Will technology help us solve this? Absolutely. Further, I think we could also say that the technology that we need to really pin the tail on this proverbial donkey, it exists. But what it may require yet is that we're going to have to be able to implement that technology that's at our disposal in unique and creative ways. And so again, Doug proposing, hey, why don't you mount this on a special bike, a camera on a special bike with a power source, so that when you're out there riding, you can move quickly, quietly, you're filming whatever is in front of you. Those kinds of approaches may be really even more important than the technology of itself. How you use that technology and whether you're creative enough to find a way that it can be implemented in ways that has not succeeded yet. And maybe that will be what finally cracks this nut.
Well, one of the things that gets used against all of us are all the camera traps that are out. It's used against us because we haven't gotten any photos from, these standard game trail camera traps. Joel, how many times have you heard that? I bet you tons.
I swear I know it's not millions, but it feels like it.
Yeah.
You would have got it by now. Because I personally have, 30 or 40 out in the field right now.
Yep.
That are never blinking eyes, and I can look at them remotely on my my smartphone, which is great technology. But yeah, I've always wondered, because Bigfoot seems to elude cameras of ease, and we just can't quite get that. And it makes you wonder what ability that Bigfoot might possess, because I've hidden these cameras. I mean, natural camouflage.
Right.
I've tried everything, and it has never worked. And it makes you wonder what abilities this creature possesses to evade photographic capture. Audio is fine.
Joel,
photographic evidence is
one word, fear. That's its biggest protection. That's the biggest thing that protects Bigfoot, fear.
I would agree. I would also ask, what special capabilities do salamanders have that keeps them off? Or the pine marten. What about seagulls? I mean, I'm sure they probably appear on camera traps, but how often do people get photographs of those? Or take a even rarer bird, the Eskimo curlew. Some say those don't exist anymore, but people still see them, but we haven't seen one on a camera trap yet. You could go down the list of different kinds of animals that, because of how they operate, because of how they subsist, because of the times of day that they operate and the areas where they reside, you're not going to find those on camera traps. And granted, they also are not bipedal, hairy, human-like creatures. But nonetheless, there may be instances where we could account for a variety of ways animals are able to evade, frequent detection with these kinds of technologies. And so, although Sasquatch is very much a different game, presumably, like you said, Doug, we can't rule out the idea that A, fear, driven by B, intelligence, allows it a unique ability to avoid detection. And that done what? That would have enhanced its abilities throughout time to survive, just like a salamander hiding under a log, right? Or just pine marten, hiding in a thicket or keeping in a burrow underground.
But Micah, I agree with you, but how big is a salamander versus a Bigfoot?
Depends on whether we're talking about Trinity Alps giant salamanders, my friend.
I'm talking about, you know what I mean, actual salamanders versus a living creature that it has been purportedly reported to be upwards of 1,200 pounds.
Yeah, no, exactly. And point taken. Well, go ahead.
Let me make one point that nobody ever talks about. I examine at least one photo a week that could be a Bigfoot. It's an arm. It's a blurry red, huge object. But they're never detailed. They're always in motion.
Blog squatch.
They're just, or they're so close to the camera, you have no idea what you're looking at. But, the latest one was a big red thing. How many big, tall red items do we have in the woods of Minnesota? We don't have a lot. But could it be a deer standing up? Could it be this? Could it be a fox jumping in front of the lens? So they get us nowhere. The shutters on those camera traps are not quick. A human can beat them. I don't know. If you don't believe me, go ahead and test it, Joel, on your traps. Go in there, something in front of it, run and grab it and get out. I guarantee it might get you, but you're just going to be a smear.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's all I want, though, is a smear. All I want, that's all I want is some sliver of light at the end of that tunnel to at least justify the effort. You see what I'm saying, Doug? Just something. Really, because it's not just me. It's a lot of researchers that got the big goose egg right now.
I realize that. It's used against us. But there could be other reasons we don't know about. Can they see in UV vision? Caribou can. Would that allow these, these styrene plastics to glow?
Sure.
Yes, that would. Are there other things that they may possess, super abilities that we don't know about? Yep, they might. So we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, I hear you, but kind of moving on here.
Okay.
Hot button time. Hot button issue time.
Okay.
Do we need, this is for all you guys, do we need a body? Do we got to kill one? What do you guys think? Do we need a body to help protect the Bigfoot so we better understand the Bigfoot? So a sacrifice of one could mean the better life of many.
That would make it a lot easier, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Flesh and blood, you can poke it, you can dissect the eyeball and see if it has the rhodopsin in it.
Here's the caveat: morally, do we have a right to do so?
Goodness, hard scientists would probably say yes. The more bleeding heart ones of us would say no. We might hope for it to be some sort of unfortunate car accident that takes it out, as opposed to actually putting your scope target on the Bigfoot and taking a shot. I know I personally couldn't do it unless it was some sort of matter of life and death protection of especially my family. But I gotta say to really satisfy the world of science, I would say yes. There's got to be a body, at least one, maybe two, maybe one of each. One of each gender.
As Jeff and Micah both know, I am an avid bird watcher. I love watching birds. I think I have 15 bird feeders now. They're beautiful to me. I mean, I hear them and I see them every morning, but my brain goes back to seeing like John James Audubon.
Yep, he killed
with all these dead birds to study them.
Yep.
So I have to kind of dig down in myself and go, okay, well, how did he separate that morally? Some of these, I mean, I know this sounds, no, it doesn't sound silly. The hell with it. Some of these birds and stuff he saw every morning. They became familiar to him to meet their ultimate demise, to further our scientific understanding, to help conserve them at a later date. So, do I want to be the trigger man? Not particularly. I'm like Jeff. I'm kind of hoping, the station wagon hits him in the woods somewhere. Yeah. But it will undeniably, I mean, if you've got, habeas corpus, if the body is there and you can take it and you can dissect it and look, would it make it easier? Absolutely. I have to struggle with my own moral dilemma, even though I have to know that scientifically it would close the case.
Yeah, I want to add to that 2 points. First, I really like your question too, Joel, about the moral question about this. I love philosophy and ethics, of course, and it's important to raise these questions because, coming over to Audubon and the point that both Jeff and Dakota make, could scientists make a moral argument for the killing of one of these creatures? Absolutely, and they probably would. We spoke with Matt Pruitt, a good friend of the program, who works with an organization, right, the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, which they say that, they intend, if they have the opportunity, essentially to take the shot. But, we asked Matt, would you do that? And he said, I think like everybody, really, I think there needs to be a body, but I don't want to be the guy that takes the shot.
Yeah,
So,
no one wants to be that guy.
Oh, yeah, and obviously a lot of people do have a sensibility. It's against their morals to kill something so human-like. Now, I also have friends who are more skeptical and who push back and have raised the argument over the years, look, and this coming back to what we discussed earlier about people who actually do go out into the wild, who go out, who goes out there and spends time in the woods in really remote areas. Mostly it can be hikers and campers too, but hunters, people who are going out there far enough away from civilization. And so if a lot of hunters are the ones who are going out there in remote places and who are seeing these creatures, why hasn't one killed one yet? Well, now Dakota and I have both had the hunter's safety course. Growing up in rural western North Carolina, that's something that you do growing up. We have been trained. I mean, I don't like hunting and killing. Really, these days, I don't go out and do it all that much. But, I mean, I know how to use a firearm, and I advocate using those, especially for protection when you're out there in the wilderness, if it's, lawful for you to carry one where you're going. Now, all that said, I don't know of one hunter who would shoot something they couldn't identify. And if you're a good sportsman, and if you have been trained with a firearm, you always know to identify not only your backstop, i.e. where the bullet's going to go, but you can also identify your target. And you don't shoot at anything if you can't identify it. Now, let's say that you're a hunter with those things, with those kinds of training, behind you, under your belt, and you are in the forest and you see something that you didn't think existed, you didn't expect to ever see, and it's walking on two legs. If I'm a skeptic and I see something walking on two legs that might be a human, the last thing I'm going to do is risk being homicide or possibly life in prison by shooting that. Now, it's a slightly different story for a hunter who believes in Sasquatch, who might be prepared for that experience, or even who is actively going out there looking for them, to do what, as Krantz said, as grisly as it may sound, science is eventually going to require to be able to, say, okay, now we know these things exist and now it should be against the law to ever kill one again. But again, I think that not only are a lot of hunters probably more resistant to wanting to kill these things, as, the ethics side of the argument that we outline here would entail, but further, those who aren't prepared and who haven't considered that aspect of it, if they saw these things, they would be afraid of what might happen if they did shoot this because they aren't sure shooting.
The hunters that I've come into contact with after what I had gone through myself personally, and I talked to them about, some of them have actually put scope on the creature, had it, and could have put lead down, down the field on it. The things that they tell me is they feel anxiety.
Yeah.
They feel scared. The last thing they thought about was pulling that trigger. Something comes over us, and me included, that creates such a moment of anxiety that it's almost like you are just locked in panic and you can't move. You can't make that decision. And that isn't just for me or a couple, but a lot of hunters I talked to over the last years have that same feeling when they come that close to one.
Well, and with other animals, let me point out, there's what's known as buck fever. Yep. I've known guys who have been out there on a turkey hunt, and suddenly when they see the quarry and the moment is at hand, I mean, the nerves swell up, and sometimes they get so excited that it's actually difficult for them to carry it out. So, I mean, that really applies even beyond Sasquatch. But now, I got to ask you, Doug, because over the years, this is something a lot of folks have told me, is when they see these creatures, initially they're like, wow, there's a Bigfoot, and then all of a sudden they freeze. And they say it's almost like something overrode my natural reaction and response, and I couldn't move. I was terrified and just frozen kind of looking at this thing. That's something else we hear a lot.
Yep. Yep, over and over and over. I mean, I've even had really highly trained hunters tell me the first thing they wanted to do for no reason is they not only wanted to leave the woods immediately, they were confused. Didn't even know their own name. And these are people that didn't have a sighting, but were suddenly doing an activity they'd done forever. And they're in a Bigfoot area, and they may have heard something prior, like a wood knock or a yell earlier. And then all of a sudden, something is telling them, get out of the woods now. And that would just be probably the most easily explained just by infrasound. You know, they're producing, like tigers do or elephants, producing some sort of infrasound. And if you look at, you know, all the spectrograms of all the weird, like I was studying a thing called the horn call. Have you ever heard the horn call yet?
Mm-mm.
Bigfoot horn call. It's very, very metallic, and I've heard it myself. It sounds like a big giant dog with croup.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Somebody with croup. You get that kind of nasally, metallic-y sound of their voice. And it sounds like a big horn honking, but not like a horn, like a creature. And so, and of course, the spectrograms prove that there's this dual tonal thing going on instead of a V that's seen in the spectrograms with human voices. Even when we try to make weird sounds, a lot of these things with Bigfoot, no matter, even if they're very different from each other, have this double track, dual tonal thing. And I had proposed the other day, I said to one of the techs, I said, have you ever looked at throat singing and compared throat singers to these Bigfoot sounds? And they're like, no. And I said, well, here's some recordings. Why don't you compare them on the spectrogram? Exact match.
Which you mentioned that's exactly what I was thinking was the Tuvan throat singing, you getting those multiple tones.
Multiple tones. And then it hit me, and I thought, I'm wondering if Bigfoots, because they probably don't have the kind of voice box that we do, if they're related to, more of an earlier primate, they're probably utilizing their entire windpipe to make sounds, just like a throat singer. On the inhale, the exhale. They're also probably getting vibrations out of their windpipe, which would allow them to mimic. Oh, by the way, back up. The best way to make infrasound, by the way, is with a tube.
Oh.
Once again,
all right.
It's a little dot.
It's another, I was going to say another dot connected.
It's another little dot that, could be, we don't know, but we are now actively comparing throat singing, which also, once again, little dot connection, happens to have originated all through Northern Asia, North America, with the Inuit and the people who lived in Northern Asia, exactly where Giganto came from. Same area. Plus, for a long time, throat singing was banned, which I find really odd. The other thing I find interesting to think about, how did throat singing get invented and why? Did they observe something making a similar sound and tried to duplicate it?
The reasons to treat yourself to a frozen drink from McDonald's go on and on. No reason is also a perfectly good reason. It's more than a drink. It's a McDonald's drink.
Enjoy our new frozen drinks today. Treat yourself to bold flavors like blue raspberry Fanta, wild cherry Fanta, and frozen Coke. At participating McDonald's, Coca-Cola and Fanta are registered trademarks of the Coca-Cola Company.
Streaming only on Peacock.
John Wayne Gacy killed 32.
Straight from the killer's mouth.
They want you to believe that I alone committed these murders.
The new gripping 6-part documentary series, John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. All episodes streaming now, only on Peacock.
That's usually what happens in these weird things. So that was just...
That would be interesting to find out the origin story of throat singing.
Exactly. I'm actually looking for that right now. If any of our listeners or anybody of you guys are historians, can start digging into that it might connect some dots for you guys.
We can certainly find it out. Now, a couple of points on that, though, too. Yes, Meldrum has talked about the idea of a different kind of a, voice box or windpipe and how that structure might actually create some of the sounds that we have recorded. There are actually an abundance of recordings of purported Sasquatch vocalizations. No two identical. Maybe some are quite, similar, but there are a lot of different, a range of different sounds that are attributed to these creatures, if indeed that's what they are. And, because of the variety, that's actually been an argument made against them. Darren Naish, the cryptozoologist, who takes a skeptical stance, but who is one of the few who gets out there and, as a scientist, talks about this, which I really appreciate. But Darren has said one of the problems is that, there doesn't seem to be any kind of clear, identifiable, singular sound we can attribute to these animals. But again, I would say, if you go down any city street in any major urban area and you talk to, 10 different people, each of these 10 different people are going to be, they're going to have different, sounds to their voice. They're going to be capable of producing different kinds of sounds. The human voice box can produce a whole lot of different sounds, but then you take into consideration everything from, size to age to sex and all these other different aspects that would influence the range and the tonality of a voice. I don't know that we could necessarily argue against the existence of Sasquatch based on the variety of the different sounds they purportedly make. Another thing, too, and this is going to sound really weird. Anybody here seen the rather peculiar film Bone Tomahawk?
I have. I love Kurt Russell.
But the thing about it, it's so interesting to me. Well, a lot of things, but I mean, why there aren't more horror/Western films? I mean, that seems like a great genre. There are a few, but I mean, it's arguably one of the better ones. But the premise of the film, for anyone who hasn't seen it, is that there is a attack and a kidnapping by a group of essentially what are termed troglodytes, cave dwelling individuals, a primitive group of indigenous residents that live way, way, way out in the desert. And they have this unusual kind of I think it's actually a sort of apparatus that they carry in their mouths that allows them to make these, howling, very eerie sounds, not unlike Sasquatch. And I can't help but think that the film was somewhat inspired by some of the accounts of Sasquatch from over the years, but also the idea of, again, a relict population of people who are living off the grid, so to speak. They're presumably people, in the film, but we might extend this a little further to the idea of, again, relict populations of Neanderthals like the Alma, that are in parts of Eurasia and what have you. The idea that not just Sasquatch, the extremely primitive ape-like creature, but also early archaic varieties of humans might have persisted. This has been something that a lot of anthropologists over the years and other scientists have proposed. Myra Shackley maybe was best known for looking at the Neanderthal connection back in the 1980s with her book Still Living. But, the thing, too, about that's interesting to me is that, well, of course, anthropologists trying to solve the riddle of Sasquatch and relict hominoids naturally gravitate toward Neanderthal, especially in the 1980s, because at that point we hadn't uncovered the existence of the Denisovans. There are other disputed or at least unknown varieties of what appear to be archaic humans that existed as recently as the Pleistocene, the Pinghu-1 jaw fragment that was located in Taiwan. We have the Red Deer Cave people from Yunnan province. Modern anthropologists are still undecided on whether those are indeed a different type of human because we haven't been able to extract that mitochondrial DNA in order to prove it. But morphologically, they're different looking enough that humans, again, some say that they don't look like modern Homo sapiens sapiens. Others say they are within the range, although they're, far out there in terms of variability that humans may possess in terms of features. But again, the idea that there might have been other kinds of archaic humans that existed as recently as the Red Deer Cave people existed, which would have been, around 11,500 to 12,000 years ago, that definitely raises some questions about the idea of relict hominoids. And so, again, the film Bone Tomahawk's kind of interesting for all those reasons. The idea of cave-dwelling, primitive people out there in the desert, but also that use this method of communication that's not unlike what Sasquatchers are purported to sound like. And it's, again, this long, howling kind of a sound, very similar to what you're describing there, Doug.
Well, the interesting thing is that not only do these sounds not sound alike, but the spectrogram is exact. There's a quality of the Bigfoot sounds, whether it's a whoop, whether it's actual talking like the Moorhead, the Barry Moorhead tapes, there is that same double line spectrogram. And if you try to fool it and try to, do some weird sounds, I'd bust you in 5 seconds. I even got trained. David Ellis trained me, and he was testing me to look at spectrograms. And I was like, nope, that's human. He's like, yep, you're right. And, I was going through, I never failed once because it's so there. The Bigfoot sounds are very, very different.
And outside the human range.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though they may, to the naked ear, sound similar. Like you could do a whoop, and it may sound similar to a Bigfoot whoop, but you put it on a spectrogram, you can bust it right away.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So
that got me. Sorry, it had me thinking.
Yeah, it's amazing. It is truly amazing. Second kind of question I got, and I know this is an oldie, but it's a classic, and I just kind of want your opinions on it. Let's talk about the Roswell, the Bigfoot world. Let's talk about the Patty film. What are you guys getting out of that? You guys believe that's the legit article, or what do you guys feel?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is, but let me just add, I like that you call it the Roswell of the Bigfoot field, But unlike Roswell, I think that there's a whole lot of substance to the Patterson-Gimlin film. And, I've got here in my studio, the guys can see, the copies of the Roswell Daily Record, from the summer of 1947. That at one time was considered the smoking gun case. And as time has gone on, there's still definitely some interesting questions. But again, we don't have footage. We don't have, actual footprint castings of purported, alien occupants. And it's interesting that so many people look at the Roswell case, even still, and say, what really happened and what does the government know? And I'm like, guys, if you watch the Patterson-Gimlin film, you actually see something that to me morphologically is different enough from humans, but also technologically seems infeasible to have actually been capable of being created as convincingly in 1967 as it's walking across the Sandbar Bluff Creek.
Yep.
But then you also add to that the side of this that, very seldom comes up in the conversation, but, we had a great talk with Jeff Meldrum about this. The track line that not only had Patterson documented, but that shortly thereafter, Lyle Laverty goes out there and he also makes photographs of this, but then Bob Titmus actually made castings, I believe. So there were several different documentations of the footprints in casting and photograph, which now, of course, with Meldrum's online footprint casting database, we have 3D scans of these, but there appears to be variance in toe displacement, also in depth, minor variances. And of course, one instance, the very famous mid-tarsal break is also apparent. So as interesting to me as the footage, there is that track line, which seems to show a foot that is not just a wooden carving or a boot that a guy in a costume might have been wearing. It seems to show a very dynamic, human-like foot, albeit a very large one, that morphologically is not entirely human. And that's really interesting. So, you take all those things into consideration and then add to that the photometric analysis by Jeff Glickman, and also analysis by, Munns and many others. I mean, I think there have been probably, 5 or 6, maybe 7 really, really in-depth analyses, including one that a gentleman here present conducted for television, which involved mapping, an actor and having them attempt to try and replicate the walk on camera.
Yep.
To my satisfaction, and again, I'll let you guys speak to this point, but again, to my satisfaction, I have not seen a convincing recreation, nor have I seen enough of the critics consider all of the data, including the actual footprint castings, in conjunction with what that film purports to show. Last point, when the skeptics make the argument that, well, it was a guy in a suit and we know who it was in the suit, tell me why, the retired Pepsi-Cola bottler, Bob Hieronymus, from up there in Washington, who was allegedly the guy that wore the suit, he says that the top part was like a big T-shirt, and that the bottom was held together by a drawstring and that it was made of horsehide and that it stank. But then the other story, of course, is that it was Philip Morris's costume from North Carolina, right here in North Carolina, Charlotte. He had actually made it and sent it up there to Roger Patterson. Now, Patterson had apparently bought a gorilla suit, but he'd also intended to make a documentary. Part of the reason he was out there in the woods filming.
To do reenactment.
Now, when Philip Morris saw the footage, And this is another point that nobody ever talks about. Morris maintained it was his costume in the film, but he said, but, that's not the mask that I made. He said it seems that Patterson had augmented the mask and maybe made something out of horsehide. Maybe that would jibe with what Hieronymus had said. The arms are definitely longer and different from the suit that I had. My suit didn't have breasts. He added it. But Morris nonetheless maintained, despite the fact that it didn't appear to be the same costume that he had designed, that he had made that. It had all these features. He said Roger Patterson had added. Last point. Bob Gimlin maintains to this day that if it was a hoax, that he wasn't in on it, and that Patterson had not only been fooling him, but endangered the life of the guy who he, Bob Gimlin, had his gun drawn on as this thing growled and walked away from them, emitting that low growl yet again. So if you look at the whole story, the inconsistencies in the skeptical narrative, the additional data in support of the veracity of the claims based on the footprints, and then also the photometric and other analyses performed of the film itself, I think it's really hard to argue that that's not potentially the most significant footage captured of anything in the 20th century.
Yep. Well, one of the things that makes it so special, it's not obstructed by trees. It's on a sandbar. And
it's not blurry.
It's like, why is that one so special? There's tons of videos. Yeah, they're blurry, they're video. This is film. It's much clearer than any video. And you can do a lot more with it. The Patterson footage is not done being looked at. It's not done being studied. It's got a lot more to tell us. But, okay, so what do you guys think, Jeff?
For me, looking at the image stabilized 4K footage that was released, I think it was maybe sometime last year. That was very eye-opening. Looking at that, it's stabilized, so you can see all the movements specifically. You can see the muscle movements below the skin. You can see the swaying of the breasts. And I will say, it boggles my mind that you would have a couple of cowboys in the 1960s go out and decide that they want to hoax the country with a female Sasquatch. That just seems like a stretch to me, that they would immediately go to, oh, this is going to be, we're going to make a female and it's going to be great. But I mean, you look at the special effects that were around back then, there was nothing close. There's nothing close to what you see in that film. And so it's very hard for me to believe that it was hoaxed.
We cannot do it today. Today, with all the modern, we didn't have stretch fabric back then. Even today with the new fabrics, they still cannot make the Patterson Gimlin.
Well, even and going with that, referencing the 4K video breakdown that Jeff did, I mean, how many people have tried to recreate just the human anatomy? That our morphology does not, to me, in my opinion, and I've seen quite a few people try to recreate it. It doesn't jibe. It really doesn't. Like, I've not even seen somebody that can closely replicate that same sort of movement. That's always been the telling. And Micah, it's interesting that you bring up, because we may have talked about it, but Bob Gimlin saying that, well, if this was a hoax, I wasn't in on it. Like, who was to say that, like, that trigger wouldn't have got pulled? Like, he was really, really, like, placing a lot of faith in some stuff right there. If I don't know. It's that's always been the one for me, though. Truly, is just how many people have we seen try to recreate the movements? It's just not convincing to me. Nothing is as convincing as the actual video itself. And Doug, I agree with you. There's so much more that we're going to continue to learn from this film.
Did you guys see the face reconstruction that we did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw it and I shared it with them.
Yeah, we took the hair off, and it's just stunning. You look at it and you go, very Native American. Everything on it made sense. There was nothing weird about it. That thing could pass for maybe a wrestler or some big Polynesian guy. There was nothing that out of the ordinary. But the high cheekbones, the extremely muscular face, it's pretty amazing. To me, the biggest thing about the Patterson footage is the fact that joints on a human could not bend where they bend on the creature. That to me that's like concrete. You would have to go in and have your forearms broken and a hinge installed in order to pull off what's in supposedly a suit. That alone, it's like, that's 100% for me.
Yeah, the arm extension argument doesn't jive to me because it doesn't seem to conform to the anatomy of the arms.
You'd have to put the hinge at the right in the middle of the forearm, because that's where it bends on a human.
Yeah.
There's no humans with this kind of weird ratio where they would, just by chance find maybe the 1/10 of 1/1,000,000% of some person that was born with birth defects that could fill the, you know what I mean? It gets preposterous.
And coming back to the facial reconstruction, it's somewhat reminiscent to me of, acromegalic features on, larger humans who actually suffer from that particular growth disorder.
Yeah.
Higher cheekbones, a slanted forehead, sometimes gaps between the teeth, but we can't see the teeth, of the subject in the film.
Right.
And you take into consideration all of these anatomical characteristics. Coming back to Dakota, what you'd said, any anatomist who looks at that footage and says that's just a person in a monkey suit, I mean, I really would have to question their grasp of anatomy with all respect, because the features of the subject do not appear to match those anatomically that are characteristic of the average human. Now, you also add to that the size element. There's a lot of division about, how tall the thing was. I know that in Glickman's analysis, I think he settled at around 7, foot 3.5, maybe. What was it?
7'2".
7'2", yeah, somewhere in there. And now Cliff Barrickman recently has also said, yeah, but I think that they're way off, and he's had a reconstruction that was made, which I don't recall which analysis that had been based on, but there's a life size which is much smaller, more than like the 6.5 foot range. And Cliff is now of the mind that it's about that size. Peter Byrne, he initially thought it was no larger than that either. And that based, I believe, on the comparison that was made in there were 2 actual reconstructions that were attempted. John Green returned to the site and he photographed it. And then Peter Byrne actually went back and they did the filming where, Doug, help me out, I always forget it. It was the friend of Roger Patterson's that had the outpost there, his son, Don, or what was his son's name, that goes back out with Peter Byrne and recreated, where he walked along where
the big tall guy. You're talking about that was a friend of John Green's.
Yeah, it slipped my mind. Anyway. But the point
still around, by the way. That guy is still around.
Yeah, it's going to drive me nuts because I'm just drawing a blank on his name. But and it's on the tip of my tongue. Anyhow, yeah, in the recreations where he goes out there and he walks on, and they could still see the impressions in the sand. Oh. Even I think some accounts say that by the following spring, the impressions of where the track line had been were still visible. But anyway, he walks along. It clearly seems to indicate that in addition to the size in terms of height, but also in terms of general bulk, Patty is far larger than a human. I mean,
picture a 1.5 foot wide thigh.
Yeah.
The thigh was 1.5 foot wide.
She is big. Okay. She puts the big in Bigfoot. And if she's a female, and we take into consideration the fact that, as we see in terms of dimorphism, in human populations, that not always, but in most cases, on average, male specimens are slightly larger than females. And that is, I think, generally true for the most part among primates. If she's the female, I'd love to see how big Daddy is.
Yeah. Well, the other
point.
The other thing that's never brought up, and that's the torso ratio.
Oh yeah.
It's totally off with Patty. I mean, the torso is much longer. The legs are shorter. And yeah, there are people that are like that, but they're a tiny % of the population. There's like one island in the South Pacific where there's a few people that have that type of ratio to their torso. So you go.
Well, I'm also interested in the skin, and naturally, I mean, a lot of people laugh about this, but guys, we got to talk about anatomy here, so we're going to talk about the breasts too. Mm-hmm. I am very interested in a couple of aspects about that, because one being that some have argued, well, again, you're not going to have hair coverage on the breasts. That's absurd. You're not going to see that, let alone pendulous breasts on a non-human species. And I'm like, well, but do we know that for sure? I brought that up to Meldrum, and Meldrum had said the thing about Patty is that it is clear footage because it's film, but it's also 16 millimeter film that is inherently very grainy. And at that distance, with the focal length of the camera and all these other factors, I mean, there is a limit, even with the 4K enhancements Jeff mentioned, to how much detail we're going to be able to see. And so Meldrum has posited the idea that, well, how do we know that there's actually hair coverage on the breasts?
There's none. It could just be,
Right.
it could stop way up, but just be 3 inches long.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Now-
the nipples clearly are visible. There's no hair on the nipples.
Right, and that is what? It's a darker coloration. Now, the light areas that we see on Patty's skin are on the face and also on, you can't see a whole lot on the hands, but on the bottoms of the feet, they're definitely brighter. Meldrum interprets it a little differently. He proposes that might be actual sand that is clinging to the bottom of the foot.
Same color as the soil. It's
Right,
the exact color as the soil.
And that's exactly what he said after having gone to the site. Now, I asked Dr. Meldrum about the possibility of, and this is again something that is true across the board for most primates, melanocyte concentration on the hands and on the feet is less. In other words, pigmentation tends to be lighter on the palms of the hands and on the feet with primates. And that would also be one interpretation of the brightness that we see on those regions of Patty's actual skin. The epidermis in those areas appears to be brighter.
Yeah, it's just like anybody, because there's no UV protection needed on the palms of the hands or the bottoms of the feet.
Right. But we also might say if regions of her face appear brighter, could that also be as a result of albedo or, a reflectiveness due to what? A kind of oil.
Yep. And it was a very sunny day.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So, again, you could do a whole show, and I'm sure you guys have, just talking about that film. There are still so many aspects. There's so much interpretation and analysis that can and should be done, and already has been done, that really people should go out there and read. And you could probably tell that we're a bunch of dorks who have done a whole lot of that.
That's true.
Yeah, you said we're like the super group of Bigfoot, and we're really the three stooges of Bigfoot research.
Harry, Curly, and Smo.
I like to think of it as like maybe the Rush of the Bigfoot groups.
Sure.
I mean, we are nerdy.
Yeah. Call us what you will.
Where do you guys all see in the field going from here? I mean, moving forward.
Powered bikes.
Yes.
So researchers using them.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, I'm excited about a lot of things that Doug is bringing up lately. The Alba Vernix, the e-bikes, the dash cams, even sound analysis. It's got me thinking. I listened to your guys' podcast with David Ellis, and he and Julie Ranch are actually going to be guests with us next month at some point.
Yeah.
And they may claim they're not exactly scientists or analysts, but they collect the sounds and they look at them and they can analyze them in their own way. But looking into different ways to be able to use that information to kind of hone in on where these creatures might be. If you could get enough microphones out in the woods that you can locate where they are when by making the sounds, if we're able to time sync them to see when they each receive the sound, maybe you can find out where the sound is being made from. Maybe not exactly, but get a good idea where it is, and maybe you can go to that area and look for some evidence that one of these creatures was there. I mean, there are a lot of exciting things that are going on right now that I hope we can promote through our podcast, through citizen science, and get more people out there doing that real serious research to help the whole community out solve this question.
Absolutely. I'm sure Dakota also will speak to, the practices that a citizen scientist should do, but, something else that maybe in the longer term that we three hope to try and do, because we want to promote citizen science. We also want to participate. But there's a lot of data that is collected by agencies like NASA. No, I'm not talking about Sasquatch sightings and things like that. We've already appealed to a lot of government agencies looking for data they may have. They don't have as much interest, unfortunately. It doesn't mean that they don't collect data that might not be useful in the search. NASA's Earth data, we've considered how that might be used, and other kinds of wildlife reporting systems and things like this. We hope to try and use the available resources and data. And yet again, this is a great subject to discuss with regard to UFOs, how existing technologies, data, the lunar orbital module, and all kinds of things like this that are monitoring everything from the moon to literally every inch of the planet Earth. How can we exploit that data that's already publicly accessible in terms of trying to study Sasquatch. So again, back to the question Joel asked earlier, there's a lot of technology at our disposal that people just don't think about using that might actually help us unravel this. LiDAR data, the list goes on. Dakota, go ahead.
Well, and you don't even need the technology. I mean, if anybody's I am a proponent of technology, don't get me wrong. But if, your average if your average person thinks like, oh man, like science and all this, and I don't have the education and I don't have this, now, the list goes on. Yeah, you do. You got everything you need. You got a pencil and a notebook. Here's I found a simple, a weather diary. It had like 5 things that you go outside once a day and make an observation of. It was like temperature, relative humidity, wind speed and direction, and like what kind of clouds you see. It's that simple. And you can, and taking and finding just opportunities like that and being able to pull that and go, okay, well, I'm interested in Sasquatch research as well. Well, what have I learned from this simple data collection exercise about weather or about birds or whatever? How can I use what I've learned from that with Sasquatch research? How can I make that a useful tool? And then, as all of you can attest to, when you start thinking like that, you start building upon those questions, and those questions make more questions. And then you find yourself like, it's amazing how much you've learned and piled on top of each other towards a common goal.
See, this guy goes out there with a notebook, and here I'm trying to mess around with spectroscopy and Landsat satellites. But we talk about all of that on Sasquatch Tracks. It's important to mention that's the name of the podcast.
Where can people catch that, Micah? Download that show.
You will find it anywhere podcasts are found, and also at our website, sasquatchtracks.com. One of our recent episodes featured the very, very esteemed Mr. Doug Hajicek. And, of course, we love to reach out to people who have been involved for years, like Doug has been, and like, great researchers like Dr. Meldrum, Peter Byrne, still in his 90s and out there working the field, So, we love having these conversations, but more importantly, we love promoting citizen science, and that's what we do on Sasquatch Tracks.
That is really cool, though. I mean, it's the people that make this thing go, too, that just as much as the research. I mean, it's those people out there that are really making the difference. I know when I've gone to Bigfoot conventions, and we had one last August, you meet some of the nicest, greatest people you're ever going to meet in your life that are just so genuine and honest and have the same interests that you do. So I highly suggest that anyone that hasn't been to go see a talk, hasn't gone to go see gone to a Bigfoot convention, definitely do that. I think that if you're a skeptic too, go. Because you're going to learn something too that that would surprise you. If not about Bigfoot, about the people looking for Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised how smart and how articulate these people are and how much passion they bring to that table.
Oh, yeah. You could compare it to the modern Grail quest. A lot of people go in search of the Grail. Few probably believe that it really exists. But again, really the search for the Holy Grail has a whole lot more to do with what it means to you. Everybody's got their Holy Grail they go searching for. Some people, their Holy Grail walks on 2 legs, and it's really hairy.
Some people. Couldn't say it better myself at the end of another show, Doug. Boy, did that 2 hours just fly on by.
Yep, it did, and that's
I'd like to thank Micah Hanks. I'd like to thank Dakota Waddell and Mr. Jeff Smith for coming on this episode. Make sure you guys tune in to Sasquatch Tracks. Download it. Listen to it. It's a great program. I've listened to it. You guys do a bang-up job. Can't recommend it highly enough. But until next time, guys, this is Joel and Doug. We are signing off. But remember, take care of each other, love each other, and keep looking for Bigfoot. Someone's got to find him. He's got to be somewhere. Why not you be the one to find him?
Me, but also you. The Pharaoh fast forwards his favorite foreign film, Powder Donut. Okay, what's my line?
The only line I see here on the script is get options based on your budget with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive.
Oh man, that's a tongue twister, huh? I'm sorry, I'm gonna need a few more minutes. Bulbous Walrus, the Bulbous Walrus.
The Name Your Price tool, only from Progressive.
The owl ran afoul of the comatose coxswain.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Me, but also you. The Pharaoh fast forwards his favorite foreign film, Powder Donut. Okay, what's my line?
The only line I see here on the script is get options based on your budget with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive.
Oh man, that's a tongue twister, huh? I'm sorry, I'm gonna need a few more minutes. Bulbous Walrus, the Bulbous Walrus.
The Name Your Price tool, only from Progressive.
The owl ran afoul of the comatose coxswain.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.